I talked about this on YouTube, by the way, but you'll see it. Go back and you look at a lot of those early pictures from the 1800s, the ones they had, because camera just got, created. And I believe it was 1826, we started getting the first successful photos. And yeah, later in that century, the 19th century, we started getting more photos from the end of the 1800s. But it's a lot of photos out there. But when you see the photos from the early 1900s and up, you still see those people being dark skinned. One of the biggest surprises people shouldn't be surprised about is understanding, one, how these people, you have Asians, Mongoloid, they call them, how they spread when they came down from Alaska. This is the Mongoloid shaped skull. I talked about this before, which would be the Asian shaped skull. They didn't just stop in America. They kept going. Migration pattern takes them all over. And then they would settle in those parts of, Peru and Panama and all that, and Hawaii. And Hawaii is one of the ones that we can see clearly because the Hawaiian royal family was clearly, black. But I'm going to read here. It says, the black people themselves are an ethnological puzzle. Many, like the Tasmanians who were exterminated by English settlers, were pure blacks. The Australian Aborigines were also very dark with African features and curly hair. The basic strain of the original Hawaiian or Hawaiians, as seen in their color and their faces, writes historian J.A. Rogers in Sex and Race, Negro-Caucasian mixing in all ages and all lands was undoubtedly Negro with an admixture of Mongolian. And Mongolian, of course, is where the Mongoloid come from, because supposedly the Mongolians, they call the Mongolians, settled China or settled that area and then begin to spread back and forth. But it's Mongoloid shape, they call it, but obviously where Mongolian comes from. These people were of black and brown complexions with wavy or close curled hair, broad facial features, and fine physiques. In short, they had the same physical characteristics as millions of other people who now live in the Pacific Islands. According to one early legend, these early settlers named their new home Hawaii in honor of a chief named Hawaiiloa, who is said to have led the Polynesians to the islands. But the name Hawaii is also recognized as a form of Hawaiki or Hawaiki, the legendary name of the Polynesian homeland to the west. The ancient land of Hawaii was much like in African society. It was a series of lands ruled by strong-willed chiefs or kings who believed that they had descended from gods. No written records of the islands were maintained, so a court genealogist similar to the African griot received names, family exploits, battles, and past glories of a proud people and their royal leaders. Hawaiian life revolved around religious ceremonies. The heiau stone platforms, generally enclosed by stone walls, served the Hawaiians as temples. Inside these centers of worship were a number of objects for ceremonial use in various rituals. They were used on numerous occasions, for to the Hawaiian people, any new undertaking in life was cause for a religious celebration. The principal Hawaiian gods were Cain, life, Lono, harvest, and Ku, war. But we also look at the Funan, the Khmer. These are Asian civilizations, or, they were black. We look at the early Japanese and Chinese and see how dark they was. And of course, here you go with the Hawaiians. And a lot of people have no idea that these pictures even exist and that these Hawaiian royal families were black, clear as day, dark skinned when you look at them. And it goes into what I said before about how they mixed in. I talked about with the Taino and the indigenous people that were in South America, that basically where the Dominicans and Puerto Ricans come from. And the Portuguese came over and mixed in, which the Portuguese is a Romanist language, Portuguese, and all that comes from Rome. This is conquest of Rome. Rome going over and conquering in Spain, where there was black people there. And then, Portuguese is basically a Roman, and, it's Roman. But they came down into South America. We know Columbus and Ponce de Leon and them, and they raped and they pillaged and they mixed in. And again, this is not to offend anybody, as I said on YouTube, and it's just history. It's what people have to know. And there's a lot of people, races of people out there, and they're proud, understandably so, who don't know their history, and they believe that their people, just got here on their own. A lot of people do. It's a lot of people who don't study history. They don't give a shit. They just like where they are. They don't care about life. They don't care about what happened or what's out there. To me, if you don't care what's out there, something is wrong with you. But a lot of people don't know. And it's not to offend anybody, but you have to understand a lot of these races of people only came to be due to the conquest of white folks. Plain and simple. You don't get, the light Dominicans and Puerto Ricans. You don't get these people until the Europeans go out and conquer and rape. So a lot of these races are a product of that. Unfortunately, it's the truth of their history. And then they have history after that. So it's one of the things that we understand, but we like to let people know, you come from us and this is our land. We were here first, if you want to get to that whole thing. But we were, in fact, here before anybody. But when you look at the pictures of these people, especially the Polynesians and the Panamanians, and how dark skinned these people was before, Europeans mixed in, it really shows you what happened. When I was in Egypt, I wasn't shocked to see black Egyptians. I was shocked to see that there was so many of them, and how, the camera is just never on these people. And it's something that I knew from the first time I went, but you go there, like I said, you see, but it just goes to show you how much the Arabs took over and conquered those lands, because they're few and, far in between, when you see them. But when you go and start looking at the older photos of Egypt, and you look at those old archaeologists from France and in Europe, as you can see here, I mean, look at the skin color of these people, of these Egyptians. It's dark and it's black. And as I talked about on YouTube, he was showing me in the photo how they took the color off, and how every single one of those hieroglyphs that has color, the color was originally pitch black, and it was diluted for a reason. Now, red skin is something that we did. Red skin is just not, native to Indians in America. That comes from us. You can see that in ancient Egypt and even in India. We put the red clay. It's different meanings for the red clay on the body, what that means, but it's still African. It still belongs to black folks. But when you go again and look at a lot of these older photos, I'm talking about the early 1900s, late 1800s, it's dark skin. These people over here are black skin. And like he told me, they came, they put the solution. You guys can see the photos. You can see them, as I showed you guys, them in there working on this stuff and taking off the black skin. And to hear it from, one of the Arab people in Egypt, them understanding what happened and them telling me, it's crazy. So I made sure they didn't want to talk, of course, on camera, and they didn't speak really good English. One of the things, because I've been, working on my Arabic for years now, so I can understand a little bit. But one of the things that, it's tough for them, it's tough for them to get money over there. So they don't really want to mess up what they got going on and put themselves out there. So I understand it's tough for them to accept one, but to even talk about. But when you go into some of those rooms in there, you can see it. You can see where, some of the darkness is coming off. When you look at a lot of these earlier depictions from China, and you can see where they basically took off the dark skin on a lot of these Chinese photos. You can see where there was not photos, but statues. And you can see throughout history how it changed from the dark skin to the light skin. So we know, whitewashed. Came in, and for many reasons, they did this. They changed this. Now, again, talk about Sheikh Anta Diop. He was, if you follow the man, he was adamant. This French guy did not play. And he took it really personally and serious that they were doing this. And he's a real researcher. And he said, clear as day, it's easy in other places I've went to try to prove if this is black skin, if the people were black. Only need a little teeny, piece of the skin, and we could settle this whole thing right now. I don't understand how anybody, especially with photos like this going around, if you actually did the research as a white person, how you can think this was a white civilization before the Ptolemies. Because it wasn't even a white civilization with the Ptolemies there, because they couldn't stay there that long, which we'll get into in a second. But of course, just by their own definition of skull shapes, the Sphinx is clearly black, it's African. And they know they can't survive there. But he talked about the Chaldeans and how Herodotus talked about they were black, and so many other people talked about these people. You have Pindar in one of his poems talk about how Jason and the Argonauts, they fought the Chaldeans, and that whole story, and the Chaldeans were black. And they are referenced in a lot of different things. But as I talked about before, Herodotus mentions the Egyptians as black. Diodorus Siculus mentions them as being black. And everybody who was historians back then, it's not a question of what color they was. And then again, as I show you, we can go and look at the history of the people and then go and see where we fled to and how we see ancient Egyptian culture in Nigeria, in Libya, in Ethiopia, and those parts of Africa where we fled to and continue that culture. You can see where this land is. Well, Chaldean, it's close to Georgia, near Russia. And how talked about the black Russians there. We can see these people in Russia a lot, but we're going to get into why this deeper in a second. But yeah, we were everywhere, and we were seen and we were known because this region was full of black people. Plain and simple. It's no way around that. So we have pictures, and we understand, and the Russians understand about the black people that's in Russia still to this day, and that was there before them. This is, of course, the land that was conquered during the wars of the Diadochi, because once they, this was happening anyway during the time they were still fighting with Egypt. So this whole land we see that the Romans and Greeks conquered, or a major part of Europe, and we were there. Of course, black people there. So we're talking about the Chaldeans over there in Georgia. We can keep going up further. Serbia and all these lands that we see where white folks, Europeans inhabit today, we were there. This was our land. And the wars of the Diadochi is them going out and conquering this land and enslaving the people. You can't even imagine, what must have took place back then. But there was a lot of us fleeing in many different directions when this was going on. We fled into Lower Africa. We fled over to Europe. We fled to many different places, and they followed us. And we were enslaved, we were killed, and this was what was happening. This is what they was doing to us. Now, whenever I usually get into conversations about Egypt, start talking deeply about it, we got so many haters. So even with the black Hebrews, they say the same thing. But then white folks say, oh, well, Sumer or Sumeria is older than ancient Egypt. Y'all talk about ancient Egypt too much. What about the Sumerians? And then it's like, what about the Sumerians? They were black as well. And to get into arguments with people about this is hilarious, because it makes you realize how much people don't know and how much simple reading will fix a lot of problems, especially for people who claim to believe in the Bible and say that the Bible is true. So we know the oldest civilization in Sumeria is dated to about 2750 BC, right? We have artifacts over 4000 BC from Egypt. We have the Narma Pile, that was one of the oldest artifacts on the planet. And we know that when it comes to comparison, the two civilizations, Egypt kills, because there's so much there and there's still so much we haven't even found yet compared to Sumeria. But just like Egypt and Sumeria, you have researchers and archaeologists that differ on the date. The date is not the point. The point is which civilization is taken from and used and talked about more than any other civilization in recorded history, and it's Egypt. And everything goes back there. Our religion and, our way of life today, stuff that we use today, still came from them. It's not much we can go back to Sumeria and say, this is Sumeria, we got it from the Sumerians. But they're used. But even still, if you want to use them, you still have to take it back to Ethiopia, which is where we know both civilizations eventually came up from after whatever happened. As I talk about, something happened, and that seems to be where civilization reestablished itself before it went on this whole migration pattern. But yeah, you just read the Bible. It says Cush begot Nimrod. Where's Cush? Cush is Ethiopia, right? Cush is right there. And Cush is clear as day, black African land. And this is where Nimrod supposedly had, started his whole, rise to power here. And Diodorus Siculus talks about the Egyptians saying that what they called the people in Sumeria and Babylon or what have you, they called them Egyptian astronomers, that they were, these are Egyptian astronomers. They went and set up civilizations there, and these are people who know what we know. And there's a couple of translations for Sumerians or Sumer, but one of the main translations is black head. That means black head. You'll see that when you go start on research, that's what it means. So clear as day, we can get off of that. It's not whitewashed, but it's them that putting doubt into your head about the two civilizations, Egypt and Sumeria. And the reason for this, as I talked about before, is because they don't want us going back in there, and then they made it evil. But they only did this to keep us from going there. So they're under control. They control it. So it's obvious, as I said before, who's beating the Roman Empire, who's beating them. There's no way in the world that the Arabs came into Egypt and took that land from them. Obviously, they established a deal for them to come in there. But you got to look at the fact that you have North Africa, you have Sumeria, you have this whole region stretching from, Morocco all the way over to Israel, all this being African territory. And it is basically the beginning or the cradle of intelligence. This is where philosophy and math and science, all this stuff we find here. So they suck to take it for themselves. So they can say, the major points, which would be, Egypt and Greece and all that, what have you, Rome, where we have these civilizations that are established and known about, that it's them who started all this culture, and they just basically went through our history. And this is very easy to prove because all they have to do is date these statues and when things sprung up, which we know didn't spring up until the fall of Northern Africa and Egypt. Clearly, we can date it to the time to where you guys came into power and when you took power away from us. But when you go and look at the royal families and people who ruled before them, it's clearly black. And they married into these families and then eventually took over. And who knows what, cruel fate, fell on the real royal people. And I talked about in Greek mythology and ancient history series about what happened and how they basically bred the Arabs to do what they done. And if they're not going to let us come into Egypt, they have to put somebody there that can stay there to keep us from going in there. And that was the whole point of the Arabs, them allowing the Arabs to come into Egypt, when Rome had control of it, because they didn't want us coming in there. It wasn't that the Arabs beat Rome and came in there. They struck a deal, as I talked about, with this status quo antebellum. And that was part of the deal. But before this, I talked about how the Persians got the keys to the kingdom from the Greeks to come in there and conquer the Egyptians, and that they bred these people